Hey y'all. So welcome everybody. My name is Hope. I am gonna be just welcoming everybody into the room today. For me, I like to focus on things in the present. So right now the time is 10:02, and also hopefully you're getting beautiful sun in your place of living right now. I am, and it's really helping to energize me this morning. So just want to take a moment and kind of ground myself in the present. But once again, my name is Hope. I'm the youth organizer at the ACLU of Wisconsin, and welcome to our work today. First, I want to take a moment and let people know in the chat, due to time, we're not going to be able to go around and introduce all of ourselves. So in the chat, I'm putting what you need to write if you would like. Please put your name, your city, and group affiliation if you have any, and your #1 budget issue. And that way we can kind of keep track of our introductions in the chat. But in the meantime, I have two things I want to make sure I do. Can people who are facilitators make sure that they have facilitators in their name, so we can make sure you all have the groups that you need to have later on, and also so everybody else knows who you are. And then also, I just want to share that the main two groups you're going to see represented today during our presentations are going to be WPEN, and as well as ACLU of Wisconsin, but we also know that there's many other partner organizations. So just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And I am going to throw it to Christian.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm admitting people from the waiting room at the same time, and like the mute button is on the opposite end of the screen. So there's that going on. Hi, I'm Christian, and I'm based in Eau Claire, and I'm the digital organizer at the Wisconsin Public Education Network. And some people that are on this call were in the January budget action workshop with us, and some weren't, and it's fine either way. I just want to go over the agenda of what we're doing today, which is going to be somewhat familiar for the people who were here in January, but with some different content. About 10 minutes into the call, once we've all introduced ourselves in the chat and gotten situated, we're going to have Heather and Jenny go over why we're here and sort of lay out the goals of the day, and go over the resources that we're using, including the resource guide and some of the topics that were covered in the previous workshop in January. And then we'll get into unpacking the governor's budget, which was released this week. And it's an important thing to do and kind of a complicated thing to do. So we're going to hear from a number of people with a number of affiliations, including Kids Forward, Wisconsin Alliance for Women's Health, Wisconsin Farmers Union, Fair Maps Coalition, and some others, to go over the governor's budget and sort of analyze what's good and what's missing, and what we can do in our advocacy based on now that it's been released. And that'll take quite a bit of time, because that's sort of why we're doing this now, is because we want to have this opportunity all together as advocates in Wisconsin to go over the budget. At 11:30, we're going to be sort of moving into the what can we do about it portion. Heather and some other individuals with the various groups that I've mentioned and some others will talk about organizing strategies specifically, and some of the things that we might be able to replicate that other advocates and leaders are already doing in Wisconsin, and how we can make that local and sort of use it in our own advocacy moving forward for the budget. And then at 12 o'clock, we're going to be put into breakout rooms where we will brainstorm some tactics in a more conversational way, so that everybody gets a chance to sort of bounce ideas off of each other, developing plans for testifying at the Joint Finance Committee, and then advocating amplifying our advocacy after that, and coming up with ways that we can do that together and individually in the breakout rooms. and we'll share a note-taking document for that at that time. And then we'll return to the main room and sort of go over the next steps, share out some of the good ideas that came from the breakout rooms, and kind of end by getting a pulse on where everybody's at and how we're feeling moving forward as we work with our local teams and individuals to advocate for justice in the state budget this year. So that's sort of the overview of what we'll do. And I'll put the resource guide and the agenda links in the chat now that I'm done speaking and I have like more wherewithal of my screen. And we will be sure to adjourn at 1 o'clock so that people can get on with their Saturdays. And I'll pass to, if Sean is here, I think Sean's gonna go over the community agreements.
I am here. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to go over real briefly a contract that I'm hoping that we can verbally agree and just, with a head nod, agree to as we all come together and learn about the budget process and strategize around how we want to turn out in our own individual regions, and how we just want to come together as a collective to ensure that our elected officials are doing exactly what it is that we want them to do. We want to make sure that they hear us, that they see us, and that they feel us. So community agreements, we're hoping that everyone is here to listen, to learn. We all don't, we don't know everything, but together we know a lot. That's something that I try to always remember, that, I don't know everything, you don't know everything, but together we know a lot. I will hope that everyone would trust that everyone is coming from good intentions, and that we all take risks, that we all participate actively, and we also challenge kindly, respect each other in all of our times. All of our times are valuable. This is the weekend. I'm sure folks would have have other things to do on their weekends other than sit through a training to learn about how to, hold our elected officials accountable with our tax dollars. I'm sure we would love to be walking and enjoying the sun, as Hope had indicated earlier in the training, but let's respect each other's time, and let's come together and learn how we can build capacity and turn folks out for our budget. Heather.
Thank you so much, Sean. I'm Heather Dubois-Bernard from Wisconsin Public Education Network, and we are really excited to co-host this event today with our friends at the ACLU of Wisconsin. A collaboration that is 2+ budgets in the making, and is an attempt to really connect the dots across our issues and across the needs in our community, and to do what we can to combat the sort of divide and conquer logic that often informs budget conversations. This idea that we have to all compete for crumbs to get nice things for our people in our communities, and that we have to position ourselves against people with whom we agree to fight for scarce resources. We are in a situation this year where we actually have surplus in this state, and we are positioned uniquely to make really smart strategic choices to do what's right by our kids, our communities, and each other. And so let's do it. That is our goal in this and every budget cycle, to make sure that we have the resources we need for all of us to thrive. And we thank you for taking time out of your Saturday to see how you can be part of that organizing and that thinking and that change making, but also to learn a little bit more about what's in the budget that the governor just dropped this week on Tuesday, and what some of the experts among us think are the realities of that budget getting passed into law, given what we heard this week. So we're here primarily to get a first review of that budget, and also to brainstorm what we can do about it together, because we know this budget matters to all of us. And our theory of change and sort of our shared purpose is that if we organize together in a coordinated way, we can make a difference by raising our collective voice in a way that is impactful and doesn't undermine each other, and helps us to build relationships both with each other and build capacity in our groups, but also with lawmakers and decision makers across the state. So our goal is to make sure that the people who we have elected to serve us deliver the budget Wisconsin needs and deserves. And we appreciate each and every one of you for wanting to be part of that work with us today. We, like I said, have been organizing with the ACLU of Wisconsin and the WILD Project, the Wisconsin Leadership Development Project, and other issue allies for the past few budget cycles to try to come together in these ways. And normally we would be meeting physically and kind of digging into this work face to face and developing organizing strategies that really help us do this work together where we live, and then connecting through a statewide framework. Like ideally we'd be traveling all over the state right now and holding local level versions of these trainings. But doing this remotely creates some opportunities and some challenges for us that we hope we can dig into by providing a framework of how the budget works, and then digging into what we can do locally separately, and hoping that after today's session, we all have some follow-up and regional outreach and organizing and next step events. You'll hear more about those later, that will help us put all of what we're learning today into action. So I am going to kick it over to my friend Jenny at Wisconsin Public Education Network to start talking about where we are now in the budget process. And I know this is review for some of you, and some of you were also at our first training. One side note on that, if you weren't at our first budget action workshop where we really dug into the storytelling and testimony stuff, that was all recorded and archived. And we also have another one of those kind of on the books as a refresher. So stay tuned for the links to those resources and more about how you can get involved in those things. So there's opportunities to catch up on what you missed last time.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny. Thank you again for joining us this Saturday morning. I just want to give a hat tip to the Wisconsin Alliance for Women's Health for this amazing graphic that makes this round the clock version of it. We usually share this kind of like just the boxes, but this is a really nice way of laying out where we're at. So in the fall, the different agencies will make their requests to the governor. The governor hosted listening sessions this last fall and into winter, and he sat down and he proposed his budget. That's what we heard on Tuesday evening, was his budget proposition. That proposal then goes on to the Joint Finance Committee, and they hold public hearings by state statute around the state. They have to hold a minimum of 4. And during that time, people give feedback and input about their budget priorities, either based on what's in the governor's budget or what they would like to see in the governor's budget. During those hearings, that's where we do a lot of our organizing around and encourage people to participate during that time and really raise issues. Then that committee comes back together, both parts, the House and the Senate of the state, and they negotiate through. And what we've seen in the last couple budgets, or the budget that Governor Evers put out last time, was that it got tossed and they start from base and begin again and build their own budget at that time. That's when they work together on one side and propose their new budget, and they debate it and make resolutions and amendments to that budget, and then they put it forth for our governor to sign. So this is like the ultra abridged version of these types of shenanigans, but typically when the Joint Finance Committee pushes forward their budget to the governor, there's oftentimes a lot of policy that's pushed into that budget that isn't necessarily fiscally related, and it's oftentimes policy that hasn't been put out into the public purview prior to this action. We've had it happen. Heather and I have been there before in the committee chamber when they've passed it literally in the middle of the night, about 12:30 in the morning once we were there, full of provisions that had not really seen the light of day, only sort of rumblings around the Capitol, which we feel like is very anti-democratic. So a lot of our work is around pushing this process into the light as much as possible and encouraging people to participate in that as much as possible and to shine lights on the things they like about the governor's budget and really lift it up. And then also to hold our lawmakers very much accountable when they aren't listening. Heather?
Thanks, Jenny. I'll just tack one thing on there about the non-fiscal policy items. As Linda already immediately noted in the chat, vouchers are one of the main categories of fiscal policy that has been shoved into the budget through these kind of late night shenanigans. And not being subject to an up-down vote means no accountability. And so a couple of other things that are on our radar from an educational point of view this year are provisions in the governor's budget that would repeal the Office of Educational Opportunity and the, that's also called the Charter Czar office at the UW system, and the Opportunity School Partnership Program, which is also called the Milwaukee Schools Takeover Czar, which is housed in the Milwaukee County Executive. Both of those offices were created through these budget shenanigans. And so don't let anybody tell you that the governor is trying to play games by using the budget to take them out, because that's how they got in. So that's just an aside there. But let's talk a little bit about opportunities for getting engaged in the budget. If you have never been to a budget hearing before, all signs point to, and this is what the co-chairs of the Joint Finance Committee said this week, that they intend to hold face-to-face hearings this year. There may also be a virtual component, but we're not yet sure what that will look like or how it will roll out. You always could and still can submit your testimony in writing, either by email, by snail mail, or by creating a video that you send to the committee. But the question is always who hears that, who reads it, who looks at it, and how do you make sure it's heard? So I think if you do want to do that, think hard about what your amplification strategy is to make sure that they got the message and that your own lawmakers heard it too. But Jenny, you want to just walk through what the Joint Finance Committee hearing looks like if people do decide to show up and go in person?
Sure. So the in-person process is a very, 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 very early in the morning arrival time to get on a list. And typically people will be lined up. There will be people from the Capitol, ushers and staffers explaining the process, shouting people out, giving a lot of directions, and people sign up to speak in that order. There's typically a big room. It can be an auditorium. We've seen them in gymnasiums. We've seen them in theaters, different places. Typically the legislators will be on a dais with microphones and the public will be in chairs seated. That was our 10-minute mark, Heather. But so the legislators will be up on the dais, and you'll wait your turn to be called. The day usually begins with local dignitaries speaking first and sort of giving free rein and invited guests. A lot of times it'll be issue advocates will get, not issue advocates, executive directors often will get to the front of the queue. The mayors of the community hosting typically will speak, and then everyone else waits a very long day. Over the years, we've been able to work with some of the Capitol staffers and the local venues in order to get tables and try to make the long day a little bit more fun by having t-shirts available, bringing in lunch, having selfie stations and other ways to sort of amplify our messages together. But it's typically a very long day, and we tell people, even if they're held during a work day a lot often, we tell people still come out after work. You could still get an opportunity, and it also helps show them that they should be available to the public. So it shows the legislators that they should be working with the people, not working against the people. So we've held lots of events again, trying to like drum up activity. We've had buses parked in front of joint finance hearings, lots of stations. We've held barbecues out in the parking lot and tailgated just as a way to sort of make the day a little bit more fun and inviting and engage other people. What we're expecting during this budget cycle is complete partisanship. This has been expressed already this week. We expect more shenanigans, as such as putting more policy into the budget later and reorganizing it. But we also think that we have a lot of opportunities. Heather?
Whatever your issue is that brought you here today, there are signs that there are people on both sides of the aisle who are really willing to listen, to work, and to look for ways to compromise. There are also capital tensions, you know, rivalries within and across the parties that I think provide an opportunity for us to maybe get a foot in the door and find out who really does agree on what right now, and like who can we build relationships with to maybe help move forward on a couple of really key issues. We could do the budget better this time if we build relationships effectively, and if we really do our part in making our contacts, not just with members of joint finance, but with our own lawmakers, to make our needs and concerns crystal clear. And if we talk about what we like in the governor's budget in a way that isn't partisan, but is like, here's why this matters to us, to our kids, to our communities, to whomever, that is an effective strategy for making sure that we're leading with the value and what we need, rather than making it about politics, which is challenging but not impossible. And then finally, and I'm sure John is going to tell us more about this in a second, there's plenty of money in this budget to do what the governor wants to do. And there are plenty of ways that we can support all of the needs that have been put forward right now in a way that is responsible and fair. So that's kind of the bird's eye overview. I'm sure many of you have lots of questions if you're new to this process. And hopefully it wasn't too boring a review for those of you who aren't. But what we want to do next is just kind of take a step back and talk a little bit more about what's in the package that we saw from the governor today. And I didn't have a chance to go through the whole resource pack, but please know that that link that we gave you to the budget resource guide, I think we called it, is a growing document that we will continue to populate with budget analysis from our partners at the back end of that document, with all of the links to the budget itself and summaries of it. That's already available on our website. If you go to wisconsonnetwork.org/budget, we just haven't had time this week to like get all of that stuff in the guide, but it's coming, and that's a living document and the link won't change. So let's start with our overview by passing the mic to our friend John Peacock of Kids Forward, which runs the Wisconsin Budget Project, who is going to tell us a little bit about what is in the budget and what is possible this year, and what the Wisconsin Budget Project is recommending in terms of a messaging framework. So thank you for joining us today, John. I am passing it over to you, and I don't believe you have any slides, but if you need to share your screen, let me know.
Yeah, I didn't bring any slides, and maybe one downside of that is I haven't really rehearsed what I'm going to say, and if I'm talking too long, no offense will be taken if you cut me off, Heather. Please do. So yeah, I'm John Peacock. I've worked for the last 22 years at Kids Forward. I came to Kids Forward to start the Wisconsin Budget Project that looks at how state spending and tax decisions affect kids and families in Wisconsin. And today I'm here to give you just the big picture overview of the budget, how much new spending's there, where that money comes from, and really, bottom line is to reinforce what Heather said of not finding ourselves, how we need to work together to not find ourselves in the position of fighting against each other for a pie that's way too small to get the the state's needs accomplished. So I'm very excited about this budget, about the governor's budget, but I'm also very worried about how it's going to be changed in the months ahead. There are a lot of good things, really great things in this budget, including a lot of additional spending. But as you no doubt know, that's also, all that additional spending is a bone of contention with Republican legislators. So just to look at that spending, in the current fiscal year, the state legislators and the governor appropriated about $19 billion of state funding from what's called general purpose revenue, general fund taxes. That is slated to increase under the governor's budget by about $1.8 billion in the first year of the coming biennium, which starts July 1st, and then by that much plus 400 million more in the second year. You add that up, that's $4 billion of additional spending in the next 2-year budget cycle. So where does that $4 billion come from? Well, there's the rub, because when you look at the projected tax growth in the state, it's $1.2 billion. So we have a gap there of $2.8 billion. And so how that's funded is that as of the beginning of this week, before the legislature passed a big tax cut bill, as of the beginning of this week, we were supposed to have $1.8 billion carried forward, left in reserves from this current fiscal year, carried forward into the next budget period. That's somewhat smaller now after the tax cut bill. We're also, the next way that the governor is closing that gap, getting up to the $4 billion additional spending, is proposing expanding Badger Care. Now it's counterintuitive that expanding Badger Care saves us money, but it's because under the Affordable Care Act, states that expand their Medicaid programs get a significantly enhanced federal match rate for many of the adults who are served in Badger Care. That would save the state $630 million over the next 2 years. Then the governor's proposing a number of closing a number of tax loopholes, and the tax changes in his budget, the uppers amount to close to $1.6 billion. There are also some tax cuts, but it's a net increase in taxes of about $1 billion over the next 2 years. Anyway, all those three things together, it doesn't quite total up to the $4 billion for some other reasons, complications we can't go into, but it is a balanced budget and it's doable. And the things that are in there, the governor isn't proposing any broad tax increases. He's proposing closing some loopholes. Now, one of the changes is he's narrowing a corporate tax. That was one of those things passed at the dead of night back about 10 years ago. That's a very inefficient tax break that pretty much eliminates income taxes for manufacturers in the state. The governor isn't proposing eliminating that, but narrowing the focus of it and the size of it for wealthier individuals and corporations. The governor is proposing narrowing the tax break for capital gains so that for more people, that tax rate would be closer to what we have to pay on our earned income. So, and those two things together, those two changes generate almost $1 billion. And he's also proposing legalizing marijuana and starting to tax that. And in the second year of the biennium, that generates $90 million. So, so there are some significant tax increases. There's the Badger Care increase. But if legislators reject those things, as some of them have said that they probably will, if they take out Badger Care expansion, which incidentally will serve 90,000 more people in Badger Care, but save $630 million. If they take that out, if they take out all the tax increases, we could be down to only having $1.2 billion of that $4 billion we need for everything in the governor's budget. And all of us are going to be essentially fighting with one another over the remaining money. And fighting, and well, not just with one another, but with a lot of more powerful interest groups. So we really need to find ways to work together. We need to find common messages indicating why it's so critical for Wisconsin to build a better future, and not just to bounce back from the effects of COVID-19, from the current recession, but to address the structural problems in our economy and the structural issues that have made our state, that have given our state the worst racial disparities in the country, that have made us one of the lowest states in terms of state aid for schools, that have made us 47th or 46th or 47th in what we spend on our public health system that we need to fight the pandemic, that have led to the huge racial disparities that we have in our state. We need to all come together with a unified message that the status quo isn't okay, that the governor has laid out a vision for how we can make very significant changes in K-12 education, serve a lot more of the more than 300,000 Wisconsinites who are uninsured, and how we can really, one of the great things about the governor's budget is there's a lot in there that's aimed at making steps to reducing the racial disparities in our state. So it can be done. The governor's laid out a plan to get it done. But if we all decide, we have to collectively decide that when we talk to legislators about the things that we're interested in, we have to also be willing to say, and too often in the past people haven't done this, that we support closing tax loopholes to raise the revenue that we need to address these significant needs in the state. If we aren't willing to do that and say that closing tax loopholes and making our tax system fairer in the process is a priority, then we're going to find ourselves fighting over a pie that isn't nearly big enough to accomplish what we're all interested in accomplishing. And I'll stop there. But with one addition, I appreciate that Heather, because I don't have any slides, Heather put up here something that we've been working on at Kids Forward in the Budget Project, a document that we call Reimagining Wisconsin's Economy, which lays out some of our platform for what we think the state needs to do. It's a work in progress. There are a lot of things that I think should be in that platform that we haven't fleshed out yet. But the more important thing is the messaging around it, the framing. And I think we have to, and I hope in the weeks and months ahead, we'll be working with you folks as we try to decide what are the best messages to get across that this is a fiscally responsible budget, and that it isn't okay to say that we can't do this, because we can and we must. Thanks.
Thank you so much, John, for taking time out of your Saturday to walk us through that, and for both your optimism and your realism on the challenges facing us this particular budget year. I know, as somebody who watched that WisPolicy interview with the joint finance co-chairs this week, and also watched the Republicans' response to the governor's budget proposal, it feels like we are gearing up for some foot dragging and some head butting around policy issues. And it will be very important to use language that does not feed that beast, but rather focuses on our values and priorities. So thank you for giving us some tools for doing that, and that Reimagining Wisconsin's Economy toolkit. And I also invite everybody to, at your leisure, scroll through the huge guide that we've linked, because we have a lot of messaging tools in there from this year and previous years that will help us unpack our issues in ways that do not antagonize, but really get to the heart of what our values are and what the needs are. So thanks for that, John. And our next, we want to dig into public ed a little bit. And we have invited our friend Christopher Thiel, who's the legislative policy manager at Milwaukee Public Schools, and somebody who has already read both the budget in brief and the massive 500+ page document, to tell us a little bit more about what's in the budget in terms of public ed and how it aligns with our vote public values and what we've been asking for these many years. So Chris, are you here?
I am here. Good morning, everybody. And my dog is greeting the mailman in the background on this wonderful Saturday morning. So my apologies for that. Greg, the mailman, is fantastic. Whatever you might hear from my dog, it's not true. Greg is the best. So thank you. And I wasn't able to jump in for the first part of the meeting, so I'm going to apologize if I'm repeating anything that has already been discussed. But first of all, my name is Chris Thiel. I'm the legislative policy manager with Milwaukee Public Schools. I've been with MPS since 2002. I'm saying all this because I've worked on multiple state budget proposals and have been through this process many times, as many of you have. And I feel like I need to just kind of take a breath before I jump into all of the kind of process stuff that we're about to go into, and just recognize what the governor has done here for K-12 education. And it is absolutely exceptional. I, in my career, certainly have not seen a budget of this type when it's needed most. I've been saying things every time I hit a decade point. I say, maybe that's wrong. Maybe I need to go a decade further. I start out saying this is obviously the best budget in a decade. And then I said 20 years. And then I said a quarter century. And then I said probably 30 years. But it really, truly, and honestly, not only as it stands by itself as a piece of work and a commitment to public schools and public education, is very much needed and very well done, and aspirational, but especially in this moment over this past year, and setting us up for the years going forward, where we are going to hit all these unknowns in supporting our students who have and our teachers and our school administrators and our school districts, as we try to not fall back because of the pandemic. And so I think the governor's framing of the budget, number one, saying we're not going to go back to where we were. This isn't a get back to budget, because frankly, the level we were at before the pandemic was not good. And the other message that came through strongly in his address was, don't let anybody tell you we can't afford it. And as you know, if you were just discussing with John and going over some of the funding details, we've been trying to monitor over the past year what type of funding will be available, and we are doing okay, and actually are positioned hopefully fairly strongly for the second half of the biennium to have funding available to actually do this. So this is not, one, this is much needed, and two, it is not fanciful in any way. This is real bedrock, based on solid numbers work. The gentleman who happens to be our state budget director, Brian Ponke, formerly was the head of budget and finance work at the Department of Public Instruction, and before that, I don't want to get in trouble with Brian here, but Brian's been around a while. So Brian goes back to the early 90s and has seen all the various funding systems and K-12 funding pieces in particular. And I think we're really lucky to have somebody like that who was able to build this budget for us. So The top line pieces that everybody pays attention to, kind of if you're in one of our 421 school districts and you're a superintendent or a business manager, you want to know what the per pupil increase is. And the governor here has put in a $200 per pupil increase in the first year of the biennium, and then another $204 increase in the second year of the biennium, and indexes that funding going forward. So that when you talk about that per pupil revenue limit increase piece, that's kind of the foundational. Okay, as long as that's going up in a healthy way, that's a good place to start. What the governor has also done here, and I know if you've been part of our conversations, you're aware that private schools get a minimum 90% reimbursement for students with disabilities, while public schools right now are only receiving 28%, and that has been a focus of WPEN. Where he did 60% last time, this time he moves it from 28% today to a 45% reimbursement rate next year, and then a 50% reimbursement rate the year after that, which is crucial. And it's crucial for all districts, and it's crucial for all kids. Because right now, because the state is not living up to its commitment to special education funding, your local school districts, all told, all together, are having to cover about $1 billion of cost to make sure we're appropriately supporting our students with disabilities that the state has turned its back on. The state in the mid-late 1970s had about a 70% reimbursement rate. And then they've just kind of, frankly, not lived up to their responsibility. And that's gone down, 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 down until it got all the way down to 25% last year. And the governor put enough pressure on the legislature, and this became enough of an issue that there was this commitment to 30%, which is still, frankly, pathetic. But it was the first time that number had moved in 10 years. If you really play the wonky K-12 educational funding game with us, you have heard the terms some certain and some sufficient. And I don't know if we're handing out prizes if people know the difference between those two, Heather, but we should. Because some certain means, hey, here's a pot of money, we're just going to give you this amount. And if we're wrong and it costs more to actually support students, we're not going to do anything about it. You get what you get. Some sufficient means, hey, whatever it costs for us to live up to our promise. For example, last year when they promised 30%, that we didn't get to 30% because costs actually went up. So instead of 30%, we're only at 28, which actually is 2 percentage points, but it's a big deal in your local school district budget. The governor in this budget proposal moves away from the some sufficient piece to a promise of some sufficient. And so the governor is saying, we're going to commit to 50%, and whatever it takes to meet that promise, we're going to make it happen. So that's a really, really, really big deal to not only move the funding that way, but to turn it to some sufficient. And I know some folks might be asking, okay, well, he did 60% last year, he's only doing 50% this year. This is where I think the challenge of the pandemic really comes in, because the other thing, the new wrinkle that they had to attend to really protect school districts is to protect us all from a dent, a fiscal dent that is being created by an anomaly in enrollment. Student enrollment in the state of Wisconsin dropped because of the pandemic by about 21,000 students, meaning on the certain count dates that the state has, 21,000 students that we would have otherwise predicted to have seen in our overall enrollment count for the state weren't counted, weren't there. That's the equivalent of the size of the student population of Green Bay. So just imagine if for 1 year the Green Bay School District disappeared, what that might do to our whole state financial system, which is kind of interdependent across 421 districts. So we know those kids are going to come back. A lot of this happened across the country, and whether it's young children or different school age levels. Next year and the year after that and the year after that, we will see those kids back in our public school districts. We will be educating them, and we will need the resources to do so. So the governor, I think, recognized that just that 21,000 kids disappearing for 1 year creates a dent over a 3 to 4 year period of time that would take $225 million out of all our public school districts, because you'll have this dip in enrollment, and it's the counting of students that kind of drives the wheel of how the rest of the whole state funding system works. So, I'm sure that, with the money they had available, first of all, they've put, 1.6 some odd billion dollars into the system. And it's, as you've seen in the newspaper articles, it's the largest investment overall in the state budget writ large. But they had to grapple with that reality. And I think we're thankful that they did, because having that fiscal dent across all of our districts just upset so many different things. So they put that in there, which to their great credit. And if you've been with us in any of these meetings, we certainly work to keep that positive attitude, but we're also not going to shy away from some of the hard facts. And some of the hard facts, as we know through the speaker's task force on K-12 education and our own analysis and study, is that Wisconsin is not where we need it to be. We have an awesome state. We have awesome schools. We have fantastic educators. All those things are true. And then we also need to be really upfront with folks and talk about the fact that right now we are last in the nation in how we support our students with disabilities. There are 5 other states who do this reimbursement rate model. And as of the last nationally available information, we remain in last place for funding kids with disabilities, which is an embarrassment. We are last, I'm forgetting the woman's name, but we had an analysis from an entity called EdBuild, and they actually presented before the speaker's task force on K-12 education, and an invited speaker flew into our state and looked our committee in the face and called us pitiful, because we are last when it comes to supporting English language learners in the state of Wisconsin with a, in her words, a kind of reimbursement percentage of less than 4%. We have some school districts, all school districts have multiple languages spoken. We have some school districts that are above 70 different languages in one school district. So if we're in last place in that funding area, that creates a disparate ability to educate kids. So the governor gets after that again this year and puts more funding into that area. And then we don't have a coherent system for funding students who are challenged by poverty. Other states have a weighting system. Right now, if you're familiar with a full-time equivalent, if you count a student, you're counting an FTE. So other states have a weighting system for some of these categories where you would count a student who happens to be challenged by poverty as 1.2 to drive more resources and support to assist students. We don't have anything like that. We have something called high poverty aid, which doesn't actually doesn't do anything to help us educate kids. It's a tax reduction piece of funding. So we've got these oddly named things that sound like they should be doing some of this work. They don't. So the governor puts in place a $75 per pupil categorical aid for students in that high poverty category. Again, if you've been with us and if you know the history, the last time the state Supreme Court looked at the constitutionality of our funding system and it was challenged, the Justice Crooks at the time said the 3 areas that the state really had to focus on to make sure things were fair were students challenged by poverty, students with disabilities and English learning students. And, you know, you don't want to be in last place in those categories anyway, but it certainly calls into question the constitutionality of our current system. So those are kind of the—
Thank you so much. That's teeing it up exactly where I needed to be to talk about criminal justice reform issues. Because we all know that, you know, a lot of these issues sort of lead into what we know to be the school to prison pipeline. And so talking about the criminal justice parts of the budget, you know, I think the governor's budget does some pretty good things as far as I'm concerned. It isn't my dream budget, certainly, but it does provide some aspirational ideas and first steps that would help mitigate some of the harms of our current system. So sort of leading from where Chris was just talking about, I mean, we know that under supporting kids in poverty and kids with mental cognitive or mental illness leads them into police contact and contact with the juvenile justice system. And so the governor does a few things in his budget that will, you know, sort of help us get kids back on track that have gotten engaged with the criminal justice system. One of those things is he eliminates the automatic original adult court jurisdiction for kids under the age of 18. And essentially raises the age of kids being brought into the adult system to 18 years of age. That's still behind. I just want to point out just about many other states in the country. And right now, Wisconsin is one of only a couple states that charge kids at 17 as adults. He also goes to close Lincoln Hills and Copper Lake Youth Facility. If you've been following this, these are our youth prisons in Wisconsin. They've been extremely problematic, extremely troubled. And bipartisan group of legislators brought a bill which was passed almost unanimously to close these facilities a number of years ago. They've just been unable to do that because of some other issues in the law. So the governor's budget would address some of those other issues, including eliminating the serious juvenile offender program and requiring, it would stop requiring what's known as a type 1 juvenile correctional facility or a youth prison, as most of us would understand that to be. Understanding that kids will do better being brought closer to home and receiving the support that they need. He also, thinking through some of the things that then the adult justice system, there are a couple really good proposals that will help shrink the overall size of the budget that's being spent on corrections long term. So right now, the Department of Corrections budget is about $1.4 billion a year. That is because we are incarcerating people longer than and incarcerating more of our population than most of our neighboring states. Wisconsin has a real problem with mass incarceration, and this budget does a few things to start addressing some of those issues, including expanding the earned release program to include educational, vocational treatment, and other qualifying training programs that are evidence-based to reduce recidivism. He would also allow a sentence in court to reduce the term of a person's extended supervision if certain conditions apply. Right now, about 66,000 people are on extended supervision in Wisconsin, and for long lengths of time, and this would allow them to apply to get their time condensed a little bit, knowing that there's sort of diminishing returns if we're supervising people for 5, 10, or 15 years. It would also expand the conditions under which a person could have their criminal record expunged of a conviction. Wisconsin, again, has one of the worst laws in the country around expungement. He ends what we call crimeless or technical revocations, creates compliance credit, again, so if people are doing the right thing, if they're succeeding in the community, They would be able to reduce their time on extended supervision. He also eliminates the felony penalty for bail jumping, which is maybe a little wonky, but actually really important. A lot of people are charged with bail jumping, and really what they're doing is missing an appointment with a probation officer. But overall, I think the governor's budget just invests more in programming, mental health and substance abuse treatment, diversion and reentry, and really trying to set people up for success after they've been convicted of a crime. Because, you know, we know that just locking somebody in a cage for a year at the cost of about $38,000 a year, that's not an effective way of dealing with it. It doesn't make anybody safer. But what makes people safer is to, you know, give people opportunities to get the help that they need and to succeed after they are convicted of a crime. We talked a little bit about legalizing and taxing marijuana. You know, I think our drug law have been really problematic in this country for a long time. No matter how you feel about the use of marijuana, like it at worst is a public health problem. It certainly doesn't need to be a criminal problem. One other thing that I just want to touch on is the governor's budget does do a few things around policing, which I know has been an issue that a lot of folks have really been tuned into this year, including requiring law enforcement to collect information about traffic stops, which in the longer term will help us eliminate racial profiling and really be a little more thoughtful about the way we are policing different communities. And it also requires some standards in law enforcement agencies' use of force policies. Right now, there's about 1,700 law enforcement agencies in Wisconsin. They are all sort of, you know, there's not a lot of uniformity required in terms of, you know, what their use of force policies look like. And, you know, not even necessarily a lot of uniformity around training. And this also does require some additional training, including right now, police are only required to complete like continuing education around firearms and vehicle pursuits. This would, you know, also require ongoing training, professional development on use of force and de-escalation. And then, you know, it would also ban under most conditions, no-knock warrants. So I think, you know, there are a lot of really interesting and helpful pieces that I just touched on a few of them. But I think we will be definitely talking about more of these proposals. And right now I will pass it to Sarah Finger with the Wisconsin Alliance for Women's Health.
Of course, now I can't get to it. Hold on one second. Okay, here I am. Hi. Thank you, Molly and Heather, for inviting me to attend. I'm with the Wisconsin Alliance for Women's Health. We've been around for 17 years. Our mission, our vision is that every woman at every age and every stage of life is able to reach optimal health, safety, and economic security. And so much of what you've already been talking about today, so much about what you'll hear about after me, it's such an important part of our intersectional agenda for policy at the state level. I know you already have some teasers. Again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to join at the very beginning. I know John Peacock already mentioned Badger Care expansion. I will direct anyone interested to a website called betterbadgercare.com to learn more about how we're messaging and how we're lifting up the importance of Badger Care expansion. But I'll just take a couple minutes just to highlight one thing we're really excited about in the state budget, which is a $30 million Healthy Women, Healthy Babies initiative. And that's something that was introduced in the last budget also. For those of you who are not aware, you know, Chris outlined how bad Wisconsin is in so many areas. But one of the other places where we are, you know, the worst in the nation, if not one of the worst over the last 30 years, has been around maternal child health disparities with Black women and Black babies. And so being the worst in the nation for so long, we are incredibly grateful to Governor Evers for, one, addressing that this is a statewide public health crisis, and again, last budget and this budget, putting a $30 million proposal together to really disrupt those disparities. So inside the Healthy Women, Healthy Babies initiative, there is $1 million invested in doulas and supporting their profession, especially the community-based doulas, the doulas of color who are on the front lines of these disparities. They really need to be able to offer their services to women in need, to be that navigator through preconception, pregnancy, labor and delivery, and postpartum to really improve those. What we're also incredibly excited about is that this budget proposes to expand postpartum Medicaid coverage for 1 full year after the birth of the child. And so right now in Wisconsin, we only offer 60 days worth of coverage, and best practices says that we should offer at least 1 year postpartum for Medicaid coverage to really help that new parent and that baby. There's some really great grants and funding dedicated in this budget to disrupt, again, those maternal child health disparities, to invest in Black women-led organizations, especially working on Black women's health. And there's some really important work around the women's health block grants and removing restrictions around reproductive health care. So that's something I don't think anyone else is going to bring up today. And so I thought that that could be a contribution to this conversation. We're also celebrating, you know, the other expansions of healthcare with around mental health and telehealth, broadband in order to accomplish the telehealth access, and some of the really great health equity initiatives that are also in this budget. So I know, I think you're running a little bit behind, Molly, and so is that okay? Is that sufficient for now?
That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your contribution.
No, thank you so much.
And let me just say also, if folks have questions in the chat and want to ask any of the people who are presenting more information, feel free to post a question in the chat, and we'll try to get those answered. So now we'll toss it to Nick Lewandowski with the Wisconsin Farmers Union. Nick, I apologize if I didn't get your name properly.
You got it, Molly. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's one of those Polish names, so you never know what it's going to come out sounding like, but thanks. Good morning, everybody. Nick Lewandowski. I'm the Government Relations Director at Wisconsin Farmers Union. Just started with WFU back in December. Prior to that, I was out at Rocky Mountain Farmers Union and actually worked for WFU briefly from 2016 to 2018. So it's good to be back in Wisconsin, especially in a budget year. So wanted to quickly go over Wisconsin Farmers Union's budget priorities and how they match up with the governor's ag and rural budget that he released the other day. So our priorities, you can find them. I'm going to drop it in the chat here so everybody can see. We actually have a budget page on our website, wisconsinfarmersunion.com/budget. And you can go there and see what our priorities are. But basically, they match up very well with the governor's proposal, the $43 million that he announced the other day that deals with ag and rural. And we're very proud of that. You'll see that we've got some great graphics there that check off a lot of the boxes that we were asking for in regards to funding. But then also how they match up to the governor's. And I'll just highlight quickly what the governor's package includes. So the first would be expanding local and international market opportunities, some of which include investing $20 million to connect Wisconsin food banks and pantries with Wisconsin producers. So that's money that will be going directly into the pockets of farmers. And, you know, many farmers right now are struggling and have for some time. And when farmers make money, they spend money, and that revolves within their communities, and that just supports rural Wisconsin in general. So that's a good thing. There's funding for the Farm to School Grant Program, which is a wonderful, wonderful program to get local foods into schools. There's the Farm to Fork program that will be created that will help build connections between farmers and non-school entities, so hospitals and other institutions like that. And then there's the creation of a small farm diversity grant program that'll help support ag producers adding new products, increasing production where market opportunities exist, or to start a new operation entirely. One of the other points in the governor's budget deals with meat processing. As many of you know, COVID-19, the pandemic itself, really exposed a lot of the vulnerabilities in our food system. Our food system has become so centralized. There's only a handful of meat processors in the state, and what we really truly need is more expansion on that, because many of you know, you went to the store and the meat counters were empty. So what this does, it's a three-pronged plan to bolster local meat processing. It creates a meat processor grant program to target the needs of the meat industry, incentivize innovation, and expand Wisconsin's overall meat processing capacity. It also creates and funds a meat talent development program, and that's not juggling T-bones or seeing how fast you can cut up a beef, but really targets the workforce development side of things. And then it adds additional food inspector positions at DATCAP, because if you don't have inspectors, you don't move meat. That's just how it is. So it gets those numbers back up. Another part of the plan is it promotes ag innovation and farmer-led conservation. Farmers are really stewards of the land. They want to take care of the land because it's what they're passing on to the next generation. So there's a lot of great programs funded within that. I'm not going to go into all the details there. But then finally, supporting farmer mental health and well-being. And this is really important right now because farmers have been struggling with low commodity prices, historically high input costs, the trade war, weather, climate change, you name it. It seems like everything has kind of come crushing down on so many. And then you throw the pandemic in there too. So what it does is it creates a new regional farmer mental health program to increase farmer access to mental health support services, coordinate peer support programs, and provide counseling. And then it also provides ongoing funding for the Farmer Mental Health Assistance Program, which is housed at DATCAP. And that supports a 24/7 counseling service, telecounseling sessions, counseling vouchers, and building the farmer peer support network. So all good and wonderful things that we're very supportive of, and many across the Wisconsin Ag Network have come out and support of as well. I'll just highlight really quickly, remember to go to our website, wisconsinfarmersunion.com/budget. We are hiring an intern to help with some of our organizing efforts, and we're going to pay them $15 an hour because we think that's what the minimum wage ought to be, and the living wage ought to be. So that's why we're doing that. But we're also going to hold some budget advocacy workshops in the month of March, the 9th, the 19th, and the 29th. That would stick out really well on calendars. Those are mainly geared to our members, but we welcome anyone who would like to participate in those, and especially those folks that are concerned about rural Wisconsin and agriculture as well. So we'll get into a lot of the details, talk about ways to engage in the process, writing op-eds, giving testimony. We've even talked about if they're not going to offer a virtual budget hearing, we might just do our own virtual budget hearing for our members and folks that are concerned about the issues that we are making a priority. But want to thank you for the opportunity today. I'll just highlight real quick my colleagues who are on the call. Bill Hogseth is going to talk about some of the deep canvassing efforts that we're going to do around Badger Care expansion, because that's a really important issue for our members as well. And then Bobby Wilson, who is my colleague within the Government Relations Department. So thanks, everybody, and happy to answer any questions. And I guess I'm sending it over to Sam Munger.
Thanks, Nick. And thanks, Molly and Heather and everyone for having me on. I am currently on contract with a group called the Center for Secure and Modern Elections that works on free and fair ballot access. I'm also working closely with a group called the Wisconsin Voting Rights Coalition, which is essentially a big umbrella coalition of more or less all the groups that work on voting issues in Wisconsin, and that includes a bunch of folks who I think are on this call, and includes Molly and the ACLU. And I mean, I'll just note that before that, I worked in the governor's office as a policy advisor, including through the last budget cycle. So have been through the wars a little bit on budget issues. So I'm going to give a quick overview of voting and elections items in the budget. Before I do that, though, I just want to go back a quick half step and sort of talk about the big picture on voting and elections, because I think that's helpful in understanding, because to be honest, a lot of the voting things in the budget are relatively small bore. It's not a huge big ticket item, especially in terms of the dollar figure compared to things like education or criminal justice, where you're talking millions and billions of dollars. So that said, I mean, I think I don't need to recap the last election for folks. I think we all lived that and the aftermath all the way up through January. So we know the level of contention that we're talking about. And since that election, and even since the inauguration, what you've been hearing a lot from, in general in the media, and in particular from the legislative majority, is this drumbeat of concerns about election integrity, of alleged improprieties, and basically making the case for restricting access to the ballot in various ways. And I think we expect to see that during this legislative session. We expect to see the majority try to restrict the ability of folks to vote in a number of ways. So with that in mind, I think it's really important that we, as a sort of movement, as progressives, note the things that worked during the last election. We were able to hold a free and fair election in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of incredibly challenging circumstances. And there was some really heroic work by folks on this call and by local elections officials to make that possible. That's not to say that there aren't things that could be improved, in particular in Wisconsin, where there have been a lot of measures like the photo ID law that have been passed specifically to erect barriers to the ballot. So I think we want to both put forward a sort of positive vision of democracy, of an inclusive democracy, of how it can work, how we can make it easier for people to vote and have their voices heard, at the same time that we note that our elections are fundamentally free and fair, and all these allegations of fraud are nonsense, frankly. So with that in mind, let's talk about what's in the budget. I'm just going to run through the things that are there really quickly, and then happy to get into, to answer questions in the chat, in the Q&A part at the end, if there are any. But so I think it's fair to say that the biggest ticket item in the budget, which is a really good one, is implementing what's called automatic voter registration, which essentially means that whenever an individual would interact with the DMV to update, renew, or to get a new driver's license, that information would automatically be used to either register them or to update their registration in the voter lists. This would have the effect of cleaning up the voter list in some ways, of correcting errors, which are one of the things that Republicans have complained about, but more importantly, it would result in a lot of new voters, disproportionately younger voters, voters of color, and voters who, for other reasons, move a lot, who have housing instability, being registered. And so that's really important. The budget allocation attached to that is $500,000, which in the context of this overall budget is about pretty much a rounding error, as you're talking about $19 billion for this and that. But it's a really important $500,000, and that's all the more reason that it's a small expenditure that has a huge impact and frankly saves money down the road, because it eliminates costs of cleaning up the lists and eliminates the necessity for a certain amount of same-day registrations, where folks have to update their registration at the ballots, at the polls, which takes time and effort and more paper, and makes it harder for local clerks and makes the lines be longer on some very practical level. So that's the big thing I would say in the budget. It also does a number of other things. It expands the period for in-person absentee voting, aka early voting, on both the front and back end, which is great and is super important. It allows local clerks to canvass absentee ballots the day before an election in an effort to alleviate that incredible crunch on election day of opening ballots, and hopefully somewhat diminish the necessity for counting till 4, 5, 6 a.m. in the morning, which is another thing that the legislators, both parties, but especially of the majority, have complained a lot about. So this is a measure that theoretically should have bipartisan appeal. It changes some of the voter identification requirements to match with some court rulings, but also to make sure that, like, for instance, student IDs are operate as makes a change to the expiration date that make them operate effectively as photo ID, basically would make it easier for students to vote. So that's really small, but really important. During the last legislative session, the number of days that you have to be in state in order to vote was expanded from 10 to 30, I think. Is that right? And this moves that back to 10. So basically for people who are moving into state or for another reason haven't been in a particular residence for an amount of time, it makes it easier for them to vote. It opens 2 new customer service centers through the DMV in underserved communities in Dane and Brown counties, which makes it easier to get photo ID, which is great as well. For folks, there's some other technical things on scheduling special elections and reimbursing local clerks, which I won't get into. And then I'll just flag, because I think it's really, really important. It does some really good things on redistricting and fair maps, which a couple of folks have flagged in the chat is hugely important, I think, in terms of democracy, arguably the biggest thing going on this year. But Carlene's about to talk about that, so I will leave that for the next section. Just by way, in wrapping up, I just want to say, like, so these are, again, not huge ticket items in terms of expense. They're not even huge in terms of voting policy. And to be candid, a lot of it is likely to be stripped out by Republicans on the JFC in the way we discussed. However, with some exceptions, I think there are things that have potential bipartisan appeal. But more importantly, this is both a chance for us to praise and lift up these things that could make our voting system better, to reinforce a positive vision of how democracy can work even better in the state, and to push back on that narrative that we need to be restricting the right to vote and so on. So as you know, as folks are thinking about what they might say in virtual testimony or just thinking about how they want to communicate on this, I think it's really important to, like, again, lift up these things that could make it easier for folks to vote and to have their voices heard, and to push back on the idea that all we need to be doing is restricting the right to vote and restricting access to the ballot. So with that, I will turn it over to Carlene.
Hi, everybody. I'm Carlene Beshen, and I am the grassroots organizer of Coalition. Our mission at the Fair Maps Coalition is to advocate for and enact in law and practice an independent and nonpartisan redistricting method in Wisconsin, and to educate and engage the public in the process of adopting and implementing nonpartisan maps. So the governor did include in his budget some things, but before I talk about that, I just want to lift up how after the last budget, Sheila Plotkin over at We the Irrelevant has been since the GAB, the Government Accountability Board, was dismantled, keeping up with how legislators vote in spite of the fact that they are hearing from their constituents. So this is just since 2018. The first column there is when she asked the legislators. The second column is the number of legislators she asked for information. The third one is the issue. Fourth is those who were the contacts that were opposed to whatever was going on. The percentage, the number of contacts who were in favor of whatever the issue is, and the last column there is the percentage. I only took the last 3 rows because all the rest of it was before Governor Evers. So you can see when you look at that, and it's a little off. 84% of folks have been opposed to the things that the governor or that the legislature has passed, and it's only that 37% who were in favor of not having a special session on gun regulation that bumped it up, less than or more to more than 10%. I guess that would have been like what? I'll do my math. That would have been 6% of contacts would have been opposed or in favor of what the governor or the legislature had passed. So next slide, please. So in the governor's budget, there is language. There's not any money attached to redistricting, but there is language around redistricting. And as Sam and others have pointed out, this is very likely to be stripped from what what actually ends up being signed into law. But what the governor has asked and wants to require is that the legislature take up the People's Maps. So you probably know that the People's Maps Commission has been having hearings virtually around the state. The 9 commissioners on the commission have been hearing from experts and also from state residents about their feelings about the current maps, what they'd like to see in future maps, etc. And he has said to the legislature, you need to take up the People's Maps. And also to prevent them from destroying any records that they have of their map drawing process, which is what they did after the 2011 redistricting when they were taken to court. They literally took a hammer to hard drives and tried to get rid of the damning information about how they had gerrymandered the maps. So I don't really have anything new to add to anything that anyone has said, except for a suggestion about things to add to your script. So I suggest that everybody say this. I wouldn't need to come before you today to beg for funding to address public education, health. The list is long. You know what the issues are. If the state legislature was not so gerrymandered and representatives were accountable to the people of Wisconsin, and partisan gerrymandering, take up the People's Maps. They need to hear this again and again and again and again and again. Now, quite frankly, we don't expect them to take up the People's Maps. But we are building the case. We are building the case for the People's Maps. We're building the case for the fact that the people of the state of Wisconsin, 72%, according to the Marquette Law School poll, want a nonpartisan process. And we will never, ever let them say we weren't paying attention, that we didn't ask for this, that nobody cares. And I have, some fiction versus fact handouts that I can share in the chat for countering arguments that we are hearing a lot from legislators about why this is not a possible thing. But please seriously consider adding this to your script, because it is the thing that keeps them from collaborating with one another across the aisle, and it is the thing that keeps them from cooperating with the governor to find solutions. So thank you for including me, and I appreciate the time.
We appreciate you, Carlene, for all of the great work that you do on Fair Maps. And thank you to everyone who shared their budget concerns with us today and your quick reads of the budget documents to be able to provide it so soon after we saw that massive document being released. We know that there are many, many other issues that we could have highlighted today, and that our partners have lots of concerns that we didn't fully unpack or address. There will be lots of time for that, and we invite you to continue to help us update our resource guide with that information as you're getting it from your partners or as you think it's relevant and worthy of sharing. I also want to acknowledge that we are joined today too by our friends at the League of Women Voters. I see Deborah's on the call and others who are associated with the League, and they've been partnering with us on this budget advocacy as well. So we know that this presentation was not inclusive, but hopefully it's a good snapshot to get you thinking about what kind of tact you might take in your budget advocacy. And Christian, I'd like to invite you to ask us, let us know if there are any questions in the chat for our speakers. In the, looks like we have a few minutes left before we go into our next section here.
Yeah, so most of the questions that have been asked were answered either as people spoke or were answered in the chat. I guess Carlene got a couple of questions, like Linda asked whether we have any power to prevent lawmakers from spending our money to defend the skewed mapping that they have created.
Not that I know of. They have the power of the purse string there and are using it. That contract was signed actually back in December. I think that we can pitch a fit, shame them, but I don't know that we can do anything about it.
And what is included in
Yeah, I
the,
see Joan's question there. What is included in the
yes,
budget to finance the redistricting campaign? There is not any money specifically in the governor's budget around this. And I have asked the question of a couple of folks about that. My understanding is because the People's Maps Commission is operating as part of the Department of Administration, that it's covered in their budget, but I still have a question out about that and can provide it when I find out the specific answer.
thanks. I think those were the questions that were really concrete and needing an answer in the chat, but feel free to put, if I missed you, put it back in the chat.
All right. And did any of our speakers have any thoughts that came in your mind after you were done talking that you forgot to say or that you want to make sure we leave with? You can either unmute and say those now, or you can drop those in the chat too. Nick?
Heather, yeah, thank you. Yes, I missed a really important one. $200 million for rural broadband or broadband expansion across the state. The pandemic has exposed a lot of things, but really, when people started working and learning from home, we realized just how bad things are across the state of Wisconsin, but primarily in rural areas. So we've been fighting for this for years to try to get more money into rural broadband. And you can look at Minnesota and the amount of money that they've invested over the years. They're light years ahead of us. So that $200 million investment is going to be huge. And it's going to help a lot of folks, but especially those in rural areas. So we're going to be highlighting that, elevating that big time.
Excellent. That's definitely one that has a huge impact on education as well, and access to educational opportunities. And it's an area where there seems to be bipartisan agreement. It was one of the things that was highlighted in that conversation with the Joint Finance Committee chairs the other day, and they both signaled that they want to see some investments in that area. So hopefully that one is a done deal.
There is a good question that just came in about whether there's money to help people pay for internet service included, like what that looks like. And I assume, is that, Steve, feel free to clarify, but like a broadband allocation or expansion in the budget? Yes. I guess whether one of the speakers knows about that
I
for,
think that's what Nick was just talking about.
Yeah, I don't know if there's an actual provision within that proposal that allows for that. I'm going to dig into that though, and I'll see what I can find out, Steve.
I haven't heard either. Does anyone else, any other speakers who are on the call know? John, do you know?
A lot of pages, so I can post the links to the budget again in the chat, and if anybody wants to like find it out in their free time later this afternoon and circle back with us, that would be super.
It is enthralling reading.
Molly, this is Deborah Cronmiller. The DCF does have money for collaborative money, I guess, state money and TANF money to provide internet access for low-income families.
Teamwork makes the dream work. That is Deborah Cronmiller, Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, here with the SAVE. Yeah, it's a long read, and there are very few people who read the whole thing. I suspect John and Tamron from the Wisconsin Budget Project do, but I cannot claim to have read all the sections. I just read the highlights. So I think we're back on time. And Heather, you want to take us back to our next section?
Yeah, on time's my favorite. This is exciting development. Okay, so now that we have a little snapshot of what's in the budget, let's talk about what we're going to do about it. We know that we are going to have to speak up loudly, that we are going to have to be persuasive, and that we're going to have to do more than just talk to the members of Joint Finance, but we're also going to have to make a difference in talking to our own lawmakers, because they're the ones who are going to vote on this bill, obviously, and they can also be influencers in this moment right now as people are having these conversations at the Capitol, and also be with the people we live with, decision makers where we live, other folks where we live. And so let's take a half hour now to talk about local level action, statewide impact, and capacity building where we live. Now, today's agenda is pretty tight, and so I just want to acknowledge that some of you might need a break. Go ahead and take it. We're recording this. You can tap back in later, but we're going to power through, and we're going to kind of tag team this next section and talk a little bit about how we can build capacity, get results, and not just speak truth to power, but also amplify our message so that we reach a wider audience and we can really start coming together on some of these issues. I don't know about you, but I get so much hope and energy from these coming togethers across our issue like we can do around the budget. And I think there's a real opportunity for us here, even in a time of a pandemic, to make strong connections across our groups and across our communities that will be meaningful and lasting. And so before we jump into a discussion of this, we want to get our finger on the pulse of where all you are in the room right now, this virtual room. And Christian is going to put up some poll questions, and we're just going to power through them. We've got 5 yes or no questions for you, and we want to get a sense of where you're at. So first of all, do you personally plan to testify in person at one of the Joint Finance hearings if you can? That is, if you could get the day off and go testify and it's near enough for you, would you do that? Yes or no? And so I think Christian is going to use the poll feature for that, but I see some of you are already going in the chat, and that's great.
Yeah, thanks for your patience. It's doing something I didn't expect, but we'll see how it goes here.
Okay, we'll just go ahead and keep those answers coming in the chat while we will. And Christian, if you want, we can start with the next one. I see some people saying yes, some no way, not during COVID, feeling that. All right, so it looks like we have a pretty healthy mix there. All right, and then if we can just stop answering that one for now, and maybe we'll do a more scientific study after the event with a survey. But if there was a virtual option, would you testify remotely? And by that I mean in real time during the hearing. Would you phone in, call in, video in, or Zoom in? Seeing lots of yes, 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 yes there. And keeping in mind that, you know, this does take a certain luxury of privilege to be able to take a whole day off and be like on call for this, or to be tagged out by your work. So it's not, we recognize that it's not an option for anyone, and you shouldn't feel guilty if that's something you can't do. There are lots of other ways that you can raise your voice. Okay, so lots of yeses, some nos. And then our next question is, do you plan to submit your testimony in writing, which is something that we encourage, by the way, whether you're testifying in person or not. One advantage to written testimony is it can be as long as you want it to be, whereas oral testimony is limited to 2 minutes. And so you really have to make some tight choices. All right, so seeing lots of yeses there. So, and this is testimony that is submitted to the public record to the Committee on Joint Finance on your budget priorities.
Heather, I'm going to launch a poll now, which has all the questions on it. I'm sorry for the delay. I thought I was going to be able to do one at a time, and I'm going to do all of them at once.
Okay, that's cool. I never saw that option before, so I'm excited to take it. Oh, it's like a quiz.
Yeah, there we go. So people should be able to answer either yes or no on each of 5 questions here.
Okay, and then our 4th question is, would you be willing to turn your testimony into a letter to the editor or an op-ed? That's one tactic that can help you get more visibility around your ideas And we are, I'll foreclose, offering a workshop in a couple of weeks to help people do that. And we just wanted to get a sense of how many people might find that useful. See, Anne didn't see the questions. For me, it just popped right up. So maybe it depends what kind of browser you have. Feel free to answer these questions in the chat if you're not seeing the poll option. And then our final question for you was, do you already have some plans where you live, either individually with your team, a group, or with a, some kind of organization you belong to, for taking local level action around the budget? In other words, educating your community, maybe holding events, visiting with lawmakers, that kind of thing. Okay, Christian, you want to close that poll and let us see the results?
Yes. Are we seeing the results?
Yeah, I am. I don't
Okay,
know if
great.
other people are. So more than half of us do not intend to testify in person at the JFC. That's to be expected. It's a hard ask, especially now during a pandemic. But an overwhelming majority said they would testify if they could remotely. 85% of us here today, or at least who took this poll. 90% intend to submit testimony in writing. 10% did not intend to do that. And then of those, 85% said they would be willing to amplify that message by publishing it either in a letter to the editor or an op-ed. That's exciting. And then finally, about half of you have already something in the works for local organizing. We're excited to hear about that in our breakout. So thank you for giving us a little snapshot of where we are now. That will be really helpful as we move into our next work. And I am going to hand the mic now to our friend Chris Hombuck-Boyle, who is one of our Public Education Network organizers, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the most impactful strategies for local level organizing around the budget. So Chris, it's all over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm so excited because I'm going to talk a little bit about the coalition building that's happened over the last couple of years. I am a retired educator from the Eau Claire School District. I was a special education teacher and a speech and language path for 33 years in the district, and then I ran for school board and did 2 terms on the school board and helped pass a very large referendum during that time. And so also was on the exec board of our union through Act 10. So to be here today, and I think I have them all here, to think about us now sitting here, not just as WEAC, not just as the Wisconsin Public Education, not just as this, just as that. Today, we have Kids Forward here. We've got the Wisconsin Public Education Network. We've got the ACLU, the Wisconsin Alliance for Women's Health, Wisconsin's Farmers Union, Center for Secure and Modern Elections, Fair Maps, the League of Women Voters, and also Alex Pond is a newbie here today as a new starting organizer for our future Wisconsin. And I'm sure I've missed some. So for me as an oldie, I just am so excited that we're here talking about how we can intersect, how we can connect the dots, how I can go now and say, 72% of the people in the market poll want to end gerrymandering when I'm talking to legislators to say, why aren't we doing this for your constituents? And I'm going to get into that in a little bit too. So thank you. I'm just going to talk about some of the experiences I've had that have hit me in the head that I went, oh, that worked. I might do that again. And so this is not just with the Wisconsin Public Education Network, but as a school board member, I'm a county board supervisor now, and as a union member. And so I think one of the strongest alliances we worked on that I think we should all think about is the Chamber of Commerce. And that's a big lift because you have to form those relationships in your cities and rurally that are really important for them to understand school funding or any other kind of funding, or those of us that are here today that can connect the dots for all the things that we feel our values address. So that was important in passing a referendum in the sense of what are the economic drivers And if you think about employment, and if you think about childcare in public schools, chambers tend to go towards business when in fact we all need each other to make the clock tick. And as they think about people coming back to their communities to rejuvenate their communities, either rurally or within urban areas, it's the kids in our public schools that come back to do that. And we have to highlight those kids and bring those stories to our chambers consistently so that they keep that. We did that in Eau Claire, and ultimately in their Chippewa Valley Rally Days down in Madison, we as school board members went with the chamber and they put our asks in their flyers that they handed off to legislators. And it was quite a powerful experience for me. So I just wanted to say that's an area we sometimes don't always connect with. And I'd love to see chamber people here today listening to what we're thinking about in the budget that is important for us. Another thing was that locally in other places within your communities, long ago before, and as the Wisconsin Public Education Network was building its power, there were other places within my community that I could embed with or provide information to that allowed the information and facts, like the 72%, to get out there so that people could talk about it. And in my community, it was Citizen Action, Jonah, which is our local division of wisdom, and giving them information and the opportunity to hear us too. Also, I wanted to tell a story about embedding recently with our local special ed parent teacher advisory. Am I done already? Yes? Okay, I'm getting a time thing where we were able to, as a network, support the parents in putting together their stories to present to their legislators. And we had 100% of our local legislators show up because it was not the Wisconsin Public Education Network or an organization, it was parents and the constituents. That was quite powerful for me to see. Also, I wanted to invite people to know that we put together a coalition for the Northwest Public Education Coalition, it's called. We have a Facebook page. We're trying to work to get some leadership into that group so that we have a voice from Northwest Wisconsin, so that we can have a group that
God, honey.
So what? So I would like people here that might be in Northwest Wisconsin to connect with me. We did do a survey to all 40 legislators who ran in the November election. You can find, I'll put that survey in the chat. We had 18 out of 20 Democrats return and 0 out of the 20 Republicans return it. So those are reflections we can all have on how we go forward and make this work and use this information with each other. And I just want to end with signs. Next week is Wisconsin I Love My Public Schools Week. If you have your proud public school proud signs, put them out next week so that people could see them. We're starting a sign brigade in Eau Claire so that the signs move from each school each day. And then we're going to continue planting them in high visibility places in Eau Claire so that we keep public schools and the funding they need out in front of our people in Eau Claire. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris, for those great examples of how people can take local action. We've got Bill joining us from Wisconsin Farmers Union to dig into one of those that they're working on, which is a deep canvas. Can you tell us more about that, Bill?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, Heather. So Wisconsin Farmers Union, we're very active in the budget process this year. And one of the things that we're doing is we're focusing on deep canvassing for Badger Care expansion specifically. And so we are focusing on 2 rural Senate districts, Senate District 23 and Senate District 17, both of which have members of the Joint Finance Committee as their state senators. And so with deep canvassing, we are specifically interested in talking to people who may not agree with us on this issue. And we had conversations about Badger Care expansion in 2020. And one of the things we learned, which shouldn't be a surprise, is that healthcare can be a polarizing issue and people have strong opinions on either side of that issue. But what we found out was that when the canvasser on one end of the phone took the time to share with the constituent a personal story that they had about their own healthcare experience, a story that had emotional weight, it made the constituent more likely to share a story of their own, which by the end of the phone call helped that caller reflect on why healthcare is important in their life or important in the lives of the people who they love. And we really found many people who at the beginning of the conversation were opposed to Badger Care expansion. After 15 or 20 minutes, they had rethought their assumptions about this issue. So we are really excited to bring this tactic to 2 key Senate districts. And we have some dates on the timeline. On Friday, March 12th, we're kicking off this effort at 6:30 p.m. and I'll drop a link to the chat. And then we're also going to be training new deep canvassers in the skills that you need to share a story of your own that you've had with healthcare, and also how to show that you're listening and ask questions to the other person on the other line on the phone so that they share a story with you. And so I'll drop both of those dates in the chat. And if you're interested in jumping in with us, it'd be great to have you. Or if you know somebody who this approach might resonate with, feel free to share it with them. And that's it.
Bill, are you doing those canvases in person or remotely?
Thank you for asking. They're all remote, hoping maybe someday to get back to the doors, but not for this campaign.
Awesome. Thank you. We'll look forward to sharing out your links. I also want people to know that Citizen Action is doing a similar, and they've got a training coming up on March 13 that I think is open to anyone in any issue advocacy area. So we'll share all those resources with you. That's really exciting work and a great example. Chris, you have a question for Bill too?
I just wanted to say, Bill, we did some deep canvassing here in Eau Claire in our townships because our referendum didn't do as well, and we figured we needed to connect there better. And so mine was the voucher piece and really just having conversations at the doors. It was amazing. And I must have knocked on maybe 150, 200 doors in the town of Union. And not one of them knew that their taxes were going to fund private schools. Great conversation. So that's a good thing to do.
It's absolutely critical, and it's essential to the #1 budget advocacy tactic that we recommend, which is building relationships. Whether you're delivering your testimony or connecting with people where you live, you're trying to connect at the level of the heart to share why you care, not just what you're mad about or what you want. It's never just about the money. It's about how do we build the kind of community we need to live in together so that we all can thrive. And so building relationships with people you already know, deepening those relationships with people who share your values and concerns in and across our communities, and then with people who have decision-making power at all the levels. Those are the people we want to build our relationships with. And we're tapping over to Carol Lenz next, who is a member of the Fox Cities Advocates for Public Education, because they are doing some amazing work connecting with their legislators, and she's going to talk to us about what they already have in the works and on their calendars. So Carol, thank you for joining us today.
Hi folks, thanks Heather, that's great. Yes, Fox Cities Advocates, we keep our eyes on things that are happening not only in Appleton, but in the surrounding schools. So our core team is currently involved in a project that we have set up where we are meeting with 6 of our local legislators via Zoom. Actually, several of our team is on the call today, so thank you to those. And like Heather said, our main goal is to establish a working relationship with our local legislators. And in addition, give them a sense of our priorities and let them know that we are willing and available resource for them. Now, we did something similar in 2019 where we established teams of constituents who would go personally to meet with each legislature. And we provided background material. We had meetings prior. We made all the contacts to the legislators, and then they reported back to us. But I must say, this method that we used this year is much easier. I think it was easier for the team. and it was easier for the legislator as well. First thing we did was we at one of our meetings, Jim Bowman, who is our coordinator, he took us through an exercise so that we could come up with what our 5 main issues were. Then we had one of our volunteers took each of the issues, and that same person then presented at each of our sessions with the legislator. We've had 2 of those sessions already, and 4 more coming up in the next week and a half. And I must say they were a great learning experience for us. One thing we found is that we had all 5 of our issues, which were special ed, mental health, early childhood, per pupil revenue, and teacher recruitment. We gave our point of view first, and then after that, we asked the legislator to give his or her comments. Oh, while this slide is up, I just want to mention that we did use a lot of the points that we gained from a WPEN session on contacting legislators. So we wanted to make sure that the session was not threatening to the legislator, but it was fair and polite and courteous. So we did use a lot of the techniques that WPEN presented at one of their sessions. Yes, so here you can see we have 6 meetings set up, 2 are finished. We did have a liaison for each legislator, and that person made the contacts, got recommended dates. That person will be doing the thank you follow-up. So we have a personal connection for each of those legislators. One thing that was really interesting in the first 2, after all 5 of our people presented and gave their story, it was very interesting, but the legislator then gave their personal story. So it was a wonderful way for us to gain insight into what that legislator thinks is important to them. So that was a real highlight. So give your story, and then they, without being asked, were willing to share what their personal story was in regards to public education. I think it was important that we stayed on time. There you can see our 5 issues. We had a definite time schedule. We kept it to 1 hour. And I think one of the most important things, like I said, was getting a feel for the legislator, where the legislator was coming from. So that was real important. And then the other cool thing is that nobody had to wear shoes when attending the session. So when did you ever get to meet with your legislator without your shoes on? So that was pretty cool. We're looking forward to the next 4, and it might be something we continue in the future because it really was easy to do. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Carol. That is such a fantastic example of how you can bring your lawmaker to you and create a safe space for starting to build a relationship where you're really connecting. And I know that the work that you're doing in the Fox Cities has been impactful, and that now you all are a resource to lawmakers, even the ones with whom you might not agree politically, and that you can build a relationship of trust and respect through these kind of events that I think is really valuable. So thank you for sharing that great model, and kudos to you and your team for all the hard work that went into it. Let's dig in a little bit now into what storytelling takes. Tomas gave the deluxe or full Monty version of this at our last workshop, but we asked him to give kind of the bird's eye view of it again today so that we can really go into our breakouts thinking a little bit about how storytelling is such a crucial part of the advocacy that we do. So Tomas, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Heather. I just want to acknowledge I was it was Sean and I both doing the deluxe version, and Sean was probably the deluxe and I was just the edition version of it. But happy to talk about it, over the right now to just give us the top view of delivering effective testimony. Thanks so much for all the folks that came in from individual organizations and talked through kind of the individual points in the governor's budget that that matter to your organizations. That was incredibly helpful. One thing that I think testimony does is kind of bring the budget policy and the budget numbers from the 700 odd page document that some of us have skimmed through or read it to life. It provides and gives context to the policies and appropriations within it, and gives us a clear picture of what the impacts of those policies will have on our own individual lives, and how a change in policy might have an impact on our lives as well. So kind of three categories to think about when we're framing our 2-minute testimony to the JVC. And hopefully there will be a digital option, but if there isn't, if you're calling in person, there will be kind of the 2-minute cap. But it's just also important to remember that even if you're putting in a written testimony or doing a letter to editor, kind of thinking through this framework and how you articulate your policy points and preferences is also helpful. So thinking through the framework as in, the self, us, and now. Why your policy issue or why your budget appropriation matters to you. Connecting it to why it should matter to us, Wisconsinites more generally, and in particular our legislators, and why the change is needed now. So connecting kind of why the issue matters to you as an individual, to us as a collective society, as Wisconsinites, and then why the change is needed in this particular time. It's critical to remember that lawmakers are people too. They have families, many have children. Many have grandchildren. So really speaking to and evoking and eliciting their emotions when thinking about these, what seem to be on paper policies, really can drive home some of the things that we're all hoping to see. Tell a story that they can't forget, and something that's going to resonate with them as they're getting back into their car after the hearing, and driving back to their home district. Give them something to ponder about, to talk about, and use your stories beyond the hearings. So thinking about how to amplify that, and we're going to have other folks talk about that in a moment. Heather, you can move on to the next slide. So, some of the goals that we'll have here, again, around storytelling, is building capacity and getting policy that works. So one key character is just delivering effective testimony. I think that requires some drafting out and some practicing, building meaningful relationships to the stories we share, and hopefully supporting and inspiring local action, amplifying our voices, and through the stories that we're sharing at the hearings, whether they're digital or in person, trying to see the changes that we're hoping and that we're seeking. And building on and thinking about public narrative. And as you are working through, thinking about this, I just want to point out in the resource guide, we have several worksheets that kind of give a little bit more context to how we think about storytelling, and testimony, and then some worksheets to think through how to get to those individual pieces of self, us, and now. So thinking through, if not me, then who's going to be the one sending in this written testimony or providing the testimony in person? If I'm only for myself, what am I? Again, thinking through why does this policy issue matter to you, but why it should matter to all of us and all Wisconsinites. And then thinking through that clear demand and clear sense of urgency and call to action to our legislators that indicates the urgency of now. And here, again, thinking through the story of self, connecting your individual policy to and in the budget, and clearly articulating why it matters to you. Again, connecting it to that, why does it matter to others, or why does it connect to the broader Wisconsin audience? I think the folks over at Fair Maps had a great little snippet that really connected all of our issues to their issues. So I just want to give them a big shout out for that. And then, why do we need the change that we need now? One thing that we also just really want to lift up is that we may only have 120 seconds to kind of hit all these points. But one thing we want to definitely include, and oftentimes, when we're sharing, we don't always get to it, is a clear, specific budget ask. Being as specific and clear as possible as what we want to see in the budget. So I often recommend putting that budget specific ask, like a topic sentence in a paragraph, right at the beginning, going through yourself, us, and now, and then ending with it one more time, copying and pasting it from the beginning to really hammer home that's what we're seeking. And by ensuring that you put it at the beginning, if you get cut off at the end, you've known they've heard specifically what you're asking for, and if not, getting that at the end to ensure that you're really hammering it home. So you can move on to the next slide, Heather. And I will go ahead and pass to my colleague, James, who's going to talk about, as I mentioned, amplifying our messages, stories, and testimony.
Great. Can everybody hear me? I just want to double check. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tomas. Hey, everybody. All right, home stretch to our action breakouts. We're almost there. Shake it out a little bit. Almost. I'll be as quick as I can. Hi, my name is James. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the data and organizing specialist with the ACLU affiliate here in Wisconsin. All right, let's quick talk, amplifying our message, stories, and testimony. The most important thing, and I know we've heard shades of this throughout this training, is but your audience is not just lawmakers. Just take one moment, take a step back, and think about what your audience looks like. Think about your friends, classmates, or alumni, your book club, worship groups, friends, family, social media following, all these various buckets of people in your life. This is your audience. And even better, you have an edge on this audience over anybody else, over ads, fancy campaigns, consulting firms, marketing, whatever, and so much more, because you have that pre-existing relationship, that rapport, trust, love, and validity with those people in your audience, and it is invaluable. When you have that pre-existing relationship with an individual, they're so much more likely to take action and buy into what we're doing here today. This is how substantial changes have been made, and the biggest movements in our country caught momentum and enthusiasm was when masses of people tapped into their audience, mapped them out, those personal relationships, and had those hard conversations that eventually led to change. Then this is where we get folks to amplify our stories and message. These are the voices we need to be writing and sharing their experiences to a letter to the editor or an op-ed. These are folks who can call into the radio station, amplify their stories on social media, posting video testimony, reaching out to their contacts of buckets of people through email and other channels. Local boards and legislative bodies are places to implement local change resolutions or ordinances. Making sure we're amplifying our stories, experiences, and messages on multiple channels of communication, just shown on this slide here, is a great way to apply pressure for those changes. And also, when you're posting about the budget, making sure you're using the hashtag WI budget. But that is all I have, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that, James, and for powering through a lot of information in a very short time so that we can jump into our breakouts. I think let's hold our questions for our facilitators in those breakouts, because there's going to be time to dig in there. Hashtag Wisconsin budget question just came up. You want to answer that one a second, James? What is it? It says, what does it mean to use hashtag Wisconsin budget?
Yeah, so great question, Mary. So when you're posting on, either any social media forum, when you have that same hashtag, you can click on that hashtag and you'll see everybody else who's posting about the same thing. And that, that connects a much larger audience, and you're able to mobilize off of that and also see what other people are posting about the budget.
So in our breakouts, everybody, we are going to be randomly assigned to groups that are facilitated by our organizers from the ACLU and Wisconsin Public Education Network. And we're going to divide our time equally into brainstorming some strategies for taking action at the joint finance hearings, whether you're going in person or you just want to make noise on that day, and then what we can do in our communities. And so Christian just put a link in the chat that I want everybody to click on before we go into the breakouts. That is an interactive note-taking document. Once you're in your breakout room, you'll go find the box for your room, and you and everyone else can take notes in real time in that document. And our goal is to come out of this half hour with a mountain of great ideas that we can sort through and try to tap into. We want to know what you already have planned. We want to know what you want to do. And Christian, whenever you're ready, you can kick people over into those breakouts and I'll start the timer. We're going to, we're a little off schedule, but we can make up 5 minutes for it on the back end. So we're going to take 30 minutes for these breakouts and we'll see you on the other side of them. When you get a pop-up inviting you to join your breakout, just click yes, and you'll be sorted into that room. And thank you for being patient as
I want Gryffindor.
As we move in.
So those of you that are still here, you should have gotten a pop-up inviting you to join a breakout room that had a facilitator's name on it.
I know that our group, we have someone that's going to report out. So what I would do, or what I would like to do, is just call on the folks from each of those groups to report out. And if those folks can raise their hand, if you can just go to the reaction tab on the bottom right screen and just raise your hand, so that I know that you are the person that's going to be reporting out from that group, that would be great in helping me call on and calling on you. Okay, so our group went great. I had some amazing people in my group, some great ideas, and I'm looking forward to the local level action that they are going to be engaged in. And so, since I am the facilitator of this portion, I'm going to call on Linda, who was in my group, and then I will go from there and calling on other folks to report out. That's how it is, folks. When you are the facilitator, you get to dictate who goes first. All right, Linda, could you report out on our group, please?
Absolutely. So we just talked about actually past things that had happened at Joint Finance Committee hearings, recording testimonials for media and social media kind of out in the lobby after people had testified, but that strikes me as something that we could do remotely as well. And then having welcome tents or tables, depending on what kind of setup there is, what kind of weather we're having, with coffee and snacks and displays. And then a press conference outside of the event, so that you get some local press coverage, and then having a central area with statistics and factoids to be used in testimonials or letters to legislator. And someone pointed out the WPEN website is a great resource for that, at least for education issues. And then going into the local stuff, we talked about different ways to contact legislators locally. A postcard drive would be something that you could do remotely. And then newsletter, this was something Carol Lenz had going. They had a list that was developed already, and just sending out a newsletter to local contacts so that you know what's coming up as far as action items and opportunities. Phone calls and Zoom meetings to brainstorm action on a local level because every area is different. Social media connections and word of mouth is a great way to get started. That was one of my goals, is to develop a local community. And get visible at community events with booths and brochures. So if you have different opportunities around your area, farmers markets or whatnot, events, get out there, get your name out there. And doing car parades, either around the city or near elected local officials' offices. That's a great way to get attention and maybe some press. And then doing phone banking to legislators, similar to the postcards, just have kind of a coordinated message and a coordinated time to contact them with your things. And then Sean name dropped Melissa as a person who might be able to coordinate the beginnings of local action. Thanks to Melissa for being volunteered by Sean. And then there was a advocacy opportunity here that someone dropped in to our notes as well. The faith advocacy for climate justice. It's going to be March 18th, 2021 at 10 a.m. So, and there was a registration link too that is in the main Google Doc. So if people want to access that, they can. That's it.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. And I did name drop Melissa, ACLU regional organizer, who is in Linda's area. Melissa may receive a few emails from some folks to figure out how to begin some connecting and planning around local action. So I'm going to go down the line, and the next person up that is in my screen is Chris, and then after Chris, Heather.
Okay, we had a great conversation, great group of, what was there, 6 of us. Under joint financing, some of the plans and ideas were the Farmers Union, and Bill was saying that he's got training, he's training members to testify. We talked about the focus areas and some of the overlap now, given our conversations today on how you can connect the dots for some of the other areas of focus, just like one of their priorities is broadband, but certainly that affects everybody. Todd talked about KEA Forward Kenosha holding and convening training in March and expanding more to parents. Certainly that Wi-Fi expansion piece for schools came up again. And that led to a conversation about should there be a depository somewhere or a listing somewhere between all of us that you would find trainings that tell your story trainings. A lot of it is through Wild and some of the, those that have been trained in there that people could have access to. So if they couldn't go to one, they could always, there was always be one there happening, and that would be available to everybody. We thought maybe, I don't know, Wisconsin Voices, I don't know what they're doing, or us, I don't know. And then we talked about providing a place for people to monitor for the hearings when the places, where do they go for that and how do they keep up on that themselves? Local action kinds of things. Op-eds, newspaper, teachers went to the school board to get release time to testify. That was kind of cool, and the school board allowed that. Some deep canvassing opportunities in District 17 and 23. Bill talked about that. Yard signs going up for Badger Care. Again, we talked about writing, and everyone's talking about that now. Every place I go, every organization I'm part of, letter writing, op-eds, letter to the editors. So I'm wondering about writers and researchers, and where's the best place to make those connections so everybody's not doing their own thing. I'm not quite sure even what that would look like.
Thanks, Chris. So for the sake of time and to be respectful of everyone's time, I know that we're supposed to get out of here at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
I think everyone can see the doc. And so if folks want to see the remaining action items that Chris Group is going to be engaging in, check it out in the Google Doc. And for the rest of our report outs, could we keep it to 1 to 2 takeaways for the sake of time so that everyone can hear, those, and we can get on with our weekend. Thank you, Chris. And next up is Heather, then Hope.
So under Joint Finance Committee hearings, probably our top tip was just coordinating in advance to maximize the day so that all the issues are covered in the short time that you get, and then having an amplification plan. And if you look at our notes, the Heather group, there were lots of specific strategies for that. So please go in and put a plus next to the ones you like so that we know which ones we should really do as we move forward and kind of go into our next planning stages. And then under local action plans, the idea that got the most energy in our group was one that Bill in our group had to maximize connections you're already making at the local level. He's in a neighborhood group that already meets Saturday mornings at 10 o'clock and that just has natural conversations about stuff they all care about. Bringing the budget into that, saying I'm going to testify, talking about what your concerns are, opening it up, making those connections. Like now, like first you were just friends, now you're like people with a purpose. And so it's a really great way to just tap into the energy and values that you already share with people you already know.
Thanks. So for my group, I noticed like quite a few themes. So like the day of action, we talked a lot about providing testimony. There was a lot of conversation around like the different options for providing testimony, but also like amplifying the fact that this is work that's best done with the coalition group. So there was also talk of several people in the group building coalitions with partners before. One specific suggestion I wanted to amplify came from Bryn, I believe, who was saying she was hoping to gather testimonies of students who are directly impacted. So again, emphasizing the fact that the stories from people who are directly impacted by these policies or lack thereof can help really drive home the importance of action around these budget items. And so locally, there was some very interesting ideas, again, about coalition building, also about amplification through social media, but sharing that Barbara brought up the fact that you can also use arts to amplify these with visuals. And so consideration of like developing visual tactics of amplifying messages as a way to like continue keeping these things in the forefront of mind, but also like building coalitions and sharing those messages throughout communities and building that mass is really important.
Thank you, Hope. And next up is Amelia, then Molly, then Tomas.
Hello. We had a really good conversation in my group, but the pattern that kept coming up over and over again was creating relationships with people who might have more social capital or a little bit more clout with the legislators than we ourselves might have. So trying to create relationships with your county board of supervisors, making sure they're educated. Are they going to show up and testify? Other people could be journalists, school board members, school administrators, just other people in your circles who might just have a little bit more social clout than you, who them showing up and speaking might matter a little more to the legislators, and encouraging them to do that.
I think we heard pretty similar things than other folks have already said, but I think just adding a +1 to, you know, empowering people to be the organizers of their own social networks, as Alex put it, and really like making sure that, you know, we are reaching out to non-traditional partners, Republicans, local legislators, and asking them to carry our message forward as well. I forgot who I was supposed to pass it to, Sean.
Tomas, and then so after you, Molly, Tomas, James, and then I believe Melissa, and then we wrap, or back to Heather.
Thanks. In our kind of in our JVC thinking, one of the ideas we came up with is that if we do go, if you are prepared to go in person, I know we've had shared T-shirts in the past, thinking about maybe creating some shared masks this time to illustrate some solidarity across groups, as well as kind of in our local action plans and thinking. One of the things that we thought about from organizational perspective was stolen from the Fox Valley Advocates, and thinking about, assigning liaison to individual legislators' offices, and whether or not we could hopefully, assign liaisons over, hopefully more than one budget cycle to really start deepening and building relationships as well locally with those individual legislators. So those are what we discussed, and I will pass it to whoever's supposed to go next.
So James, Melissa, and then Denise. Sorry about that, Denise.
Thanks, Sean. I'll be real quick here. The theme of a lot of our points was how can we be more influential and powerful than the forces that are influencing the folks and the folks. Sorry, how can we be more influential and powerful than the other forces with the other people on the committee? So we thought good ideas would be reaching out to donors with overlapping interests and budget priorities. For the sign up for the JFC hearing, paperless sign up for physical attendees. One idea that had a lot of enthusiasm was recruiting local lawmakers who support our mission to attend. I think we thought it would be really, really powerful to have maybe mayors or county executives or city council members of certain communities that would carry a lot of weight. They were testifying, prioritizing calling in and calling out so they don't necessarily respond to negative criticism, but like appeal to the good in what we're doing, and that the fact that it is in fact the right thing to do. Making sure we're organizing multiple channels of communication to our hearings, and then just locally focusing on a local level, local and locate and partner with local grassroots power groups / organizing muscle, finding the folks who are the movers and shakers who get the work done, so we can get folks to attend in certain districts. Maybe mapping out donors who support JSC committee members, and having our team map out their personal relationships. And I'll pass it to Melissa.
You're muted, Melissa.
Go. All right, thank you. Thanks, James. All right, so real quick, we had a fantastic group. I just want to share before I get in, Cindy Crane, if you want to share your event in the chat for everyone, for anyone who may be interested. I also know there was some with Carol Lenz. We had some people in this group that really liked how Carol organized those in-district meetings. So if Carol, you could put your contact information in the chat, that would be great. The next thing that we have on here is really looking at at the Joint Finance Committee, just, having people come that may be directly impacted, but focusing on, people with their personal stories, and getting them, I think, trained in how to best tell their personal story. The next thing, coming with, having talking points prepared for people, setting up tables, also to bring in a video camera to record testimony. We want to also take lots of pictures to share on social media, and doing live social media interviews while at the hearings is a way also to get people sometimes to come or more engaged. The other thing that we saw, local ideas. One of the things that Cindy Crane has with her event coming up on March 18th is there is a group that's fasting for 20 days. So for those who might be interested in that type of a tactic and what they hope to have an outcome for, Cindy would be best to contact for that. Also too, I think just building with local faith groups and coalition partners, and attending in-district listening sessions. We have one of our legislators that is holding a listening session via Zoom next week. So just double checking to see if your local legislators are hosting those. And that would be it.
Thank you, Melissa. Denise?
Okay. My group, what I think is the most overwhelming thing was making sure we're using things and using groups of people that are already in place. And what's really cool about this budget is the number of crossover issues and groups that can be engaged together that maybe in the past have never been engaged together. for example, the farmers union and public schools about the farm to school food program and idea, and how that helps so many other people, and also the environmental community of sustainability issues and things like that. So making sure that partners that the legislators haven't always seen together, that they see them together, and putting testimony, because of the need for virtual this year, to putting our testimonies out in a number of different platforms, whether it's YouTube or TikTok, Twitter, all these different places to get people to go and learn about messages, but also actually videotaping and sending those video messages directly to legislators' offices so that they see that information and they get that information. And we really talked about individual contacts with legislators during the joint finance process, but also making sure that we find ways to have, rather than just candidate forums, have issue forums, and that people can hear these issues, but also invite legislators to come and be part of those and hear those. And I liked all the things that they talked about with creating local action plans, but really, and also using media outlets, call-in radio shows to get our messages out there, and amplifying access to allies and coalitions to really make a megaphone for our messages. And the other thing that people wanted to make sure they had was single-page issue briefing sheets, so that people could have easy talking points, but also easy leave behind messages for people. And that's it. Oh, and it was a great group.
Thank you, Denise. And I'll pass it to Heather to wrap us up.
I'm super stoked about all these great ideas. And I just want to remind you all that that interactive document is going to stay live. I'll keep it live until 5 o'clock tonight. So you can go in the next couple hours and look through what other people said. Put a plus sign next to the ideas you like. That's how we're going to know what ideas we liked best that we heard. But let's take a minute right now, everybody, to just share what's one thing that you heard today that you are definitely going to do to take action around this state budget. Just put it in the chat. What's one thing that you are going to do to take action for sure? We want to walk out of here kind of feeling like we are ready to move on this. And I so appreciate all of you sharing out these amazing things. Building coalitions, testifying, designing an issue paper. Please send us that. Amplifying on social media, love it. Writing, connecting with building unity. Okay, these are great ideas. Please keep them coming. In our last couple of minutes here, I just want to invite you all to stay connected. Getting informed is the first step, but it's not an action step. To know what the problem is and not do anything is to be part of the problem. The next thing we need to do is put this knowledge into action and really make a difference. And so on March 6th, we're having an op-ed and letter to the editor writing workshop with Matt Rothschild. On March 13, that citizen action training is coming up. On March 18, we're doing another storytelling workshop. And in between all this stuff, we've got lots of other things. If you registered for this today, you're probably on our email list now, so you're going to get notifications of all these. We've dropped some links in the chat for other upcoming workshops and events, and we hope that you'll come to them, bring your friends, and spread the word, because it's really going to take all of us mobilizing the people we already know and are tapped into if we're going to move the needle on this. Thank you so much for taking the first big step today in helping us unpack what our budget concerns are and imagine what we can start doing together moving forward. We're excited to support local level organizing all over the state and then come together as a statewide voice to really demand the change our communities deserve. You can follow this QR code or the link in the agenda for today to get to the evaluation forum. I actually don't know if that's the right QR code. Is it the same link as last time, Molly, for the survey?
It is not. It is a different
Okay,
link.
so don't follow that QR code. That's the old one from last time, but we'll send you an email with the link, or maybe somebody can drop it in the chat. It's also in the agenda. But do let us know what you liked about today's workshop and how we can make the next one better. We are very excited to move forward and to see Wisconsin pass a budget that works for our communities and puts our needs and our values at the front and center of our budget priorities.
Heather, can you go back one slide as you're wrapping
Yep.
up, just so people can see those dates? Thanks.
Yeah, there you go. If you go to wisconsonnetwork.org, there's a calendar where you can see all of these and get the registrations for those as well. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to all of the different partner organizations and individuals who are here today. We appreciate your energy and your expertise and look forward to next steps.